Good day all, welcome back to South Africa. For this video, does diversity work? So we've seen the last 2 or 3 years, in actual fact the last 4 or 5 months, I've seen quite a few videos what's happening in Europe. You will see a lot of Europeans standing up to the immigration problem. The last video I watched this morning was somewhere in Belgium where let's just call it for argument's sake, an immigrant was destroying a coffee shop table for some reason. Obviously something happened there and he was just going bananas, and one of the Belgium guys, let's not speak about race here, but one of the Belgium guys actually had to stop this guy from destroying this poor coffee shop. So all over Europe we are seeing these videos and these actions taking place of non-Europeans just making a mess of Europe. Papers lying around, people losing their shit because the Europeans are not wanting to, for some reason, give them more, or the stuff in Europe that's currently happening is really extreme. So the video that I've compiled for you today, I want you to listen to it, and unfortunately I couldn't get a video about this, but I could get the audio of this because of certain copyrights and so on. But I want you to listen to this. And I want you, as a South African, and you can even do it as a European or American, compare what you are listening and what he's saying versus the reality on the ground today. Now, those of you who've followed me for a while know that I personally stand for cultural identity. And I've said this many times before. I do not mind other cultures doing what they're doing and the way that they are doing it, especially in South Africa, where race and equality is a major thing. It's been propped up so much that it's become an issue in South Africa, race and equality. So listen to this video and understand that where we come from, that we prefer to stick to our own culture, and that we prefer to build our own culture and our own identity, and that we do not mind if other cultures and other races does the same. But it must not be to the detriment of the other side or the other cultures. And that is currently the opposite what is happening in South Africa and in the world. In the world at large, there's a massive attack on white people. A massive attack on white people. And these people tend to forget that white people built this world. The world that we currently see and the technology that we see is not all white people, but a big part of it was us. So listen to this audio clip. It's an audio clip from 1966. It references the Apartheid era and how the separation system worked. And it's important for us to understand from a video from 1966 compared to today. So let's say in a perfect world, this system kept on going. How would the world have looked, or how would South Africa have looked if this apartheid system, which everybody hated so much, if it continued? Leave your comment, like and share, and God bless. Enjoy.
The plight of the African black, then, so far as I can understand it, is a plight that, as you would put it, evolves from the fact that he is a guest in your country, just as though he were a Malawian or what have you. And under the circumstances, he is bound to follow rules that are made for a white society. The policy of separate development, as I understand it, has at this point evolved, roughly speaking, as follows: that about 14% of South Africa is reserved for the Bantustans.
It's not a question of being reserved for them. That is where the mistake is made all along the line. To interpret this situation, you must know something of the history.
Yes, I wish you'd tell us something about
this country and its people. It so happens that more or less, for all practical purposes, the time that the whites moved up from the Cape, the blacks moved down from the middle of Africa, and they settled certain portions of what is now the Republic of South Africa. The Xhosas settled the Transkei, the Zulus settled portions of Natal, the Tswanas settled portions of Western Transvaal, the Sothos settled portions of Northern Transvaal, the Vendas settled another portion of Northern Transvaal, and so I can go on. And they claimed certain land which to this day they still possess. So it wasn't a question that it was reserved for them. They settled that land and they've got it to this very day. But apart from that, and the whites settled the rest. But apart from the land that they initially settled, and which today is still their land, in 1936, the then United Party, under the leadership of General Herzog as Prime Minister and General Smuts as Deputy Prime Minister, they passed a law that saying that in addition to that land which the black peoples originally settled, the whites at their expense should add 7.25 million morgen of land. And that land is still being bought up today. As a matter of fact, about a little over 6 million morgen of the 7.25 has already been bought, and we are now buying up the last remaining 1.25 million of morgen of land.
So your point is that historically, that land which is theirs continues to be theirs.
Continues to be theirs, and we didn't put them there and say to them, look, that is where you must live. They settled that land, and they picked that land, and let me say so, from an agricultural point of view and from a rainfall point of view, it is the best land in South Africa.
Well, but it is true that I think the figure is 2 million people have actually been moved, correct, during the past 15 years, told to go other than where they would like to be.
No, it's not only black people that have been moved. Whites are being moved as well. I've just tried to explain to you that whites have to evacuate no less than 7.25 million morgen of land. And blacks are put on that land.
Well, essentially...
Well-developed farms and well-developed land.
Well, essentially, as I understand it, you view the situation in South Africa roughly as follows, that the black population are your guests, that they actually belong in the ancient territories. To the extent that they live and work in your territories, they must accept that they are not first-class citizens.
You can more or less equate them to the guest workers in Europe. Because it's not only the black workers from Tswana land or Venda land or Zulu land that come to work in South Africa. Independent, the citizens of independent African countries come to South Africa to look for work for the simple reason that their own countries can't employ them. You have more or less 90,000 Malawians working in this country. And if we were to say to Malawi tomorrow, and we've never had anything to do with Malawi whatsoever, it's a country, as you know, situated far away from us. If we were to say to them tomorrow, I'm awfully sorry, I can't accommodate your people any longer, you must take them back, their economy will be very, very seriously hurt. The same applies to Lesotho, an independent country, member of UNO. If we were to say to Lesotho, we are sorry, we can't employ their 105,000 people working in this country at the moment, you can well imagine what will happen to the economy of Lesotho. And
Well,
the same applies to Botswana, and the same applies to Swaziland, and the same applies to any other of the African countries who come to South Africa to look for work.
well, but Mr. Foster, what you are saying is either a commentary on the paradise of South Africa or on the misery of the countries they flee from.
No, it's not a question of misery either, or a paradise either for this matter. It is simply that as far as the whole of Africa is concerned, it's got a backlog in development. To understand that, again, one must look at their history. But the point is, and I'm not saying it in a derogatory sense at all, but for generations to come, on account of the fact that they multiply by over 3%, as compared with ours of little over 1%. For generations to come, their difficulty will consequently be that they cannot create sufficient avenues of employment. And therefore, for generations to come, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying it in a derogatory sense at all, but in a practical, realistic sense, their main export will be labor, because they can't employ their own people. And it so happens that until that time, that they have developed to such an extent that they can employ their own people, they will be forced to look to South Africa and other countries to employ their people whom they cannot employ themselves.
Now, the employment conditions in South Africa have been severely criticized because of the extraordinary disparity in the revenue earned by a white person as distinguished from a black person. The last estimate I saw of that was 12 to 1. Now, is this a policy of conscious exploitation, or is this because there is a superabundance of labor and therefore you try to pay it as little as possible?
No, it's a question of the stage of development that people have reached. Whilst you are on that subject, I don't suppose you'll mind if I tell you this, that according to your own figures, published by the Americans themselves, Dr. Munger made use of the figures some time ago. The average rate of pay of American firms in this country to certain categories of workers, the average rate is $140 for the same category of work. In Brazil, you pay 66. And for the same category in India, American firms pay 33. But nobody worries about India, nobody worries about Brazil. But South Africa, being the whipping boy, apparently must feel it on her back.
Well, I see your point, but I think that what people in America would comment on that is that it is one thing to pay all Brazilians $66 a month. It would be another thing to come to Africa and pay $50 a month to a black man and $500 a month to a white man.
Again, that argument is not true, because there are thousands of blacks and coloreds in this country who, in fact, earn more than whites. It's not a question that there is a minimum pay for whites and a maximum pay for non-whites. You take our industrial legislation. Our industrial legislation says specifically that there must be no discrimination as between white and non-white when pay is fixed for certain categories of work. But naturally, it stands to reason that you don't pay an unschooled man the same salary as a highly skilled man.
So you're saying there are no disparities?
I use the word unschooled. Unskilled, of course, is the word, not unschooled.
Sure. But so you're saying there are no disparities in the income that is earned in the practice of an identical job?
No, a white fitter and turner earns exactly the same wage as a colored fitter and turner. Or a white mechanic earns exactly the same as a non-white mechanic. The Industrial Conciliation Act provides that. There are, in other words, I want to get this very clear. There are no maximum wages for non-whites and minimum wages for for whites. There are minimum wages for all categories, white or non-white. And as far as maximums concerned, it depends entirely upon the employer. The background of all this is that there are many countries in the world, and mainly for that reason they vote against us, are annoyed with us because we haven't got the system of one man, one vote as far as the whole republic is concerned, and they won't accept the policy of separate development, which means that there is in fact a white state in South Africa and 8 black states consisting of different peoples with their own language, their own customs, their own traditions, etc., etc.
Well, how do you account for the special animosity against South Africa? Is it a lack of understanding, in your opinion? And if so, why haven't you more successfully made your case understandable? Or
Well,
is it a hostility that arises from the relative economic success of South Africa?
Well, let me explain it to you this way. This government, with its policy of separate development, came into power in May 1948. Prior to that, General Smuts, who was an international
Hero.
hero, to use your words, he led this country, and he experienced the very same thing that you know, that we are experiencing today. The difference was, however, this, that there were only 3 independent black countries represented in UNO at that time. And in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that he had an international reputation, he came back in 46, in 47, and 48 to the parliament of this country to say that people wouldn't listen to him, that it wasn't possible to talk to them because the whole issue was so emotionally clouded, as he put it.
Well,
So it's not a question of only this government, it's a question that that was the attitude against South Africa right from the very start, in spite of the fact that General Smuts was one of the founder members of UNO and together with 1 or 2 other people wrote the charter.
well, is it emotionally cloudy as a result of the main trunk of the apartheid idea, or is it primarily the petty apartheid, what you call here, petty
no,
apartheid, the little indignities that black
Petty
people suffer?
apartheid wasn't even known in those days.
Was
It's a modern invention of my political opponents. Only it was only
your
the word
political
was only
opponents?
coined about 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Well, what do you call it when, let's say, blacks have to go on top of the bus? Is that part of apartheid in general, or is that petty apartheid?
I don't know. You had the same experience in America. You would know better than I.
Well, we called it Jim Crow.
No, as that is how we developed in this country. It was customary to do it that way in South Africa.
Well, I'm asking you whether you think it's intrinsic to the idea of apartheid or whether it's expendable. For instance, here in Johannesburg, very recently, they all of a sudden decided that black and white people could sit in the same park bench. Now, that's all of, 3 weeks old, that decision? Now, that's what I would call petty apartheid, unless you say that the whole trunk of the apartheid thing is fragmenting as a result of that dispensation.
No, the whole basis of the policy of separate development is to avoid wherever you can friction. Friction as between the various races. Because a country situated as South Africa is concerned, must at all times, if it wants to develop properly and have stable government and good order and peace, must go out of its way to avoid friction as much as possible. And where it creates friction, then you keep people apart. Where it doesn't create friction, then you don't do so.
And this is an empirical question, is it?
Yes.
In other words, you wait X number of years, and if white and black people don't start fighting in the park, then you allow them to associate.
No, I've said time and again, and I'm on record as saying on the 14th of September 1966, when I first took over, the basis of the policy of separate development is not that I'm better than the other man.
I didn't say that.
No, I say what I said. I said the basis is not that I think that I'm better. The basis is that there is a difference. And unfortunately, not only in South Africa, but the world over, where different peoples meet, you have friction. And as we see it, and as we develop, we do our level best to avoid friction.
So, so that what we call a petty apartheid here is your way of coping with potential friction.
With potential friction, that is the only basis of it.
Well, now suppose you have black man A and white man B saying that it is, as far as they're concerned, far more provocative to keep them apart than to permit them, for instance, to lunch together at a restaurant. Why is it that your judgment as regards friction is superior to theirs?
No, because it's my duty to maintain law and order.
Yes, but I'm asking you to explain a law that seeks to act in behalf of two individual human beings, respecting a matter over which they are sovereign, namely their feeling for each other.
No, but as I've tried to explain to you, and I think we'll go round and round in circles, you can take it right from the school stage. Blacks have their own schools. Coloreds have their own schools. Indians have their own schools. Whites have their own schools. That is how we develop. We don't even put an Indian and a colored child in the same school as a black child. And from there you can you can argue the whole thing out. And you find in practice the moment that you put Indian and black children in the same school, you have friction leading ultimately to violence. And the same will apply if you put white children and black children in the same school.
You're suggesting that there are no successful multiracial societies, but that isn't true.
I have nothing to do with multiracial societies elsewhere. I must deal with the situation in South Africa as a realist as I find it.
But you're speaking in universals. You say there will be friction. Do you mean there will be friction in the South African context?
Yes.
But you don't mean other parts of the world?
Let us be honest. Those who say that there aren't friction in other parts of the world, well, they're just talking nonsense. Because you and I know that there are, in fact, friction.
Well, sure. There's, I think probably racial animosities are temperamentally the most
you have a handful
obsessive.
Of black people in Britain and you have friction there. You have 10% black people in America. And in spite of the fact that they are Americans, and we'd
have a hell of a lot more friction if we had apartheid.
That I don't know, and I don't want to criticize your way of life at all.
Yeah,
all I am saying is that in spite of the fact that you have a minority of blacks, you have friction. In our case, well, we have to deal with a majority of blacks.
Yeah, well, there's friction in all free societies. In Mozambique, which is not very far from here, there is no apartheid, and there's no obvious friction that I can see. Whites and blacks go to schools together and buses together and so on. Same hospital,
up to a certain point, because there are very, very few whites there, in fact.